Welcome to the fifth and final part in our five-part series on not-for-profit financial statements. My name is Jackie McLaughlin with Chazin and Company. As outsourced accounting professionals, we can help. So let's get started. Today we're going to talk about the statement of financial position. In for-profit terms, it's known as the balance sheet. Throughout the remainder of this video, I'll use the terminology balance sheet since more people are familiar with that. As I mentioned in the last videos, there's two primary financial statements that both profit and not-for-profit organizations have. That is the balance sheet and the income statement, also known as the P&L. In the not-for-profit world, the balance sheet is known as the statement of financial position, and the P&L is known as the statement of activities. They have different names, but not so very different data. The statement of financial position, or the balance sheet, can also be likened to LeBron James' basketball career. During the course of his career, he'll play seasons. During each season, stats are accumulated: how many points he put on the board, how many free throws he made, how many assists he had. At the end of each season, those season stats will be zeroed out so that he can start all over again the next season. When those season stats are zeroed out, they are accumulated in with his career stats and become part of those career stats. The balance sheet can be likened to LeBron James' career stats. The balance sheet matters because it reports your assets, your liabilities, or also known as your debt, which is really important to keep your pulse on, and also the nonprofit version of retained earnings, called net assets. In a normal balance sheet in a for-profit organization, you'll see assets, liabilities, and equity. Equity implies ownership, though, and not-for-profits can't have ownership. So in not-for-profit, you'll see assets, liability, and a section called net assets. Net assets is essentially nothing more than retained earnings. Retained earnings in a for-profit, net assets in a not-for-profit, is nothing more than the accumulation of surpluses and losses throughout the years since the organization began. Most organizations don't budget for the statement of financial position or the balance sheet. Budgeting is generally focused on the P&L. Here's an example of a balance sheet. You can see you have total assets, again, liabilities, but I draw your eye to that bottom section, which is net assets. This is the section I was talking about in the previous slide, that if you're familiar with for-profit financial statements, you're used to seeing equity there. The other big difference between not-for-profit and for-profit balance sheet is, again, down in the net assets sections, you can see that it's split between without donor restriction and with donor restriction. This comes from the P&L, and we discussed it in the last video. It's an important enough concept, though, that it warrants going over again in an upcoming slide. So again, net assets is the nonprofit version of retained earnings, and it does reflect your accumulated surpluses or losses, otherwise known as deficits, since your organization began. Down in that net assets section, the with or without donor restriction originates from the P&L and the nature of contributions received. As we discussed in the last video, donors can give contributions either with restrictions, where they want you to do something specific with that money, or without restrictions. Here's $50, here's $100. Do whatever you want with it. When donors restrict money, it's usually larger contributions, and they can restrict it in perpetuity, called permanently restricted. And that means you can never touch the principal, or they can restrict it temporarily. And usually that temporarily restricted purpose is for a purpose like build a baseball program. The temporary restrictions, though, can also have time restrictions on them. Here, I'll give you $1 million over 4 years. You can do what you want with it, but you're only going to get $250,000 a year. In that example, the remaining upcoming years, years 2, 3, and 4, will be time restricted because you're not going to get that money until year 2 happens, year 3 happens, year 4 happens. So again, in that example, the donor is giving it to you with no purpose attached to it, but the donor is telling you that you're not going to get it all right away. You'll get it over the course of 4 years. That makes subsequent years time restricted. If possible, always spend restricted money first, as long as it's being spent on the purpose for which the donor intended it. So if a donor gives you money for a baseball program and you start purchasing uniforms and shoes and bats and balls, spend that restricted money first before you spend the unrestricted money. Never, ever, ever, ever spend restricted money on unrestricted, also known as operating expenses. Never. So some of you might be wondering, well, how do I know how much of my cash is unrestricted and how much of my cash is restricted? And the easy answer to that is to look at the balance sheet. That's one of the purposes that it has. On the balance sheet, you'll see cash, investments, all of those liquid type of assets. Now, you can argue that investments aren't necessarily liquid. In the long term, they are. You can always cash out your stocks, your bonds, whatever you might have. So in that asset section, you can look at your cash and your investments, your money markets, your CDs, anything that fall into that category. Then you can drop down to the net assets section and look at how much restricted net assets you have on that balance sheet. All of your cash and investments and money markets and CDs minus those restricted net assets equals the cash you have that's unrestricted, that you can use, as I like to say, to keep your lights on rent, on your CEO's salary, on utilities, on health care, on expenses such as that. This concludes our 5-part series on not-for-profit financial statements. If you at all have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Chazin & Company. You can find us at chazindandcompany.com, where you'll find more videos, white papers, and blogs that can help you manage your finances in your not-for-profit.